Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight, rather. I'm Frederick, and welcome to this first edition of Can We Talk About It, a series where we'll touch upon various subjects in the computing and electronics sphere. But in today's first episode, we'll cover an old 8-bit friend and the long-awaited reveal of my next step-by-step series, the 6809 CPU. Joining me in my panel are L. Curtis Boyle, Boise Pete, Mike Furman, and Sloopy Malibu. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
If you
Hi.
don't mind, can you tell us a bit what your involvement is in the 6809 sphere?
What order do you want us to do?
Let's go on screen. Go ahead, Curtis.
I've been working with 6809s on the Tier City color computer since 1981 in the fall when I first got one with 4K of whopping RAM. And later on, I got involved with OS9, which we'll probably be discussing a bit later on, converting it to the 6309 chip, which we'll also be discussing a little bit later on, creating the Nitrous 9 product, which was basically taking OS9, a commercial product from Micro, which Boise can tell you a lot more about because he used to work for them, and getting the entire operating system to run with some of the optimizations available in that chip.
And Michael.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
So I think you have a whole panel of what do we call ourselves? Cocoers? I don't know what the term is, but
6809ers, maybe?
Yeah. So my first computer was a color computer, and I learned programming on that all the way from basic, and then when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I started learning 6809 assembly language. I don't have the book handy, but I think I still have the real hard copy version of the Motorola 6809 Programmer's Reference Book that we all refer to. So pretty much learned from there, and I did my own little projects as a kid, and then life happened. I came back into sort of doing Cocoa stuff around, I think it was around 2004, 2005 or so. And more recently, we mentioned DriveWire a little bit. That's one of my projects. And I got invited here to talk about Flex, which is an operating system that was originally, I will talk about that more later, but that's one of my newer projects. So.
Okay. Boise.
Thank you for having me. So I've been involved with the 6809 through the color computer. It's the first computer that I owned, and that was 30 years ago, I think. As Curtis mentioned, I did work for Microware for a time, so I'm very familiar with OS9. I worked with Curtis and others on disassembling OS9 for the 6809 and worked on a number of different ports and projects around that. So been involved with the Cocoa and the 6809 for quite a while. It's my favorite computer. It's my favorite processor.
Sloopy?
Greetings. I'm one of the newest Cocoa people. I've only owned a Cocoa since 2009. I grew up as a Commodore Plus 4 and then an Atari person. Basically, I have a affinity for all 8-bit machines of all flavors. But the Cocoa seems to have, and specifically the 6809, seems to have a power and dynamic to it that is not found in any of the other 8-bit processors of the period. And that makes it a very shiny coin, so to speak, of great interest and basically something to be further studied and learned about.
Thank you. I have a confession. 6809 is actually not the first time I've played with it. Well, actually, I've learned assembly through the 6809, and that was 30 somewhat years ago when I was in college in electronics. And I liked it, but honestly, after all these decades, I forgot it existed. So I'm actually rediscovering it now. So I have something that I've noticed in the past years, and it's a trend that there's a sort of a need to preserve vintage computers and to go back in the old ways. What's all this about? Is this about nostalgia or something else?
For my case, it's partly nostalgia, and it's partly because it's untapped. And I mean, this can go for any processor, but basically, you don't learn all the tricks of a processor like in the first year. You'll be discovering new things, and the rest of the hardware within a machine as well. So I always wondered, like, how far could you push the 609 or the 609 once we discovered the secret features? And if you had enough time and deadlines weren't an issue, how far could you take something? Could you learn new tricks where you could run stuff that 20 years ago you thought would have been physically impossible to do on that machine? So for me, it's also trying to push the original hardware and see how far it can go.
Interesting. Any others that have any take on what's this?
Yeah. So for me, I always describe why I play with retro computers to lay people this way. I basically hold up my phone and I say, this phone is so complicated. It's not possible for one person to understand the entire thing. One little teeny chip, the screen controller, or battery management. All of those things are actually more complicated than um, than any of the 80s, the Coco, or any of the old retro computers. So I always explain it that um, it's possible for me to look at the documentation and to actually understand how the whole thing works. My education is in software, but I like understanding the hardware, and it's possible for me to do that. And it's not possible, unless you're talking about like Arduino or some other microcontroller. But this is something that I grew up with, and I'm actually sort of dovetailing into what Curtis said. Every time I do some project on the color computer, I learn more about it. So those are sort of the two reasons from my perspective.
No, I completely agree. I mean, that's what most people are always inquiring. Why are you doing this? I mean, it's
Yeah.
pointless, and basically, it's to learn. I mean, I can actually do my own thing. I'm building something from scratch. Can you do the same? You can't. In today's computer, it's just you assemble PCs, but it's not building a computer. It's not creating it from scratch, building the software, making it run to do something. So this is I'm very passionate about it, and
Hmm.
people don't seem to understand.
I think a big part of it also is that when we were in our teen years and such, our resources and income were pretty limited. So now we're capable of purchasing and using and trying hardware that we could have only dreamed of back then. And our minds are more developed so we can understand concepts and ideas in a much different reality, so to speak, so that we can understand more of the machine that we used in our youths so that we can enjoy them more. I mean, most people will look back fondly of their formative years and they will have the fondness for the things that they used and played with and such back then. And that's all we're doing is we're looking back at our formative years and reliving those days in more of a direction of how we wanted to back then, but were incapable of.
I'll agree with everyone on the panel. Nostalgia can take you so far. Nostalgia is loading up a game that you haven't played in a long time and getting into it. But if you want to look at the pedagogical aspect of learning and improving upon a processor like the 6809, there's still a lot to be learned, to be gained from playing around with the processor. I particularly am focused on operating systems, OS 9, other operating systems. There's a lot of new cutting edge stuff that you can do in there. There's also things like the Turbo 9, which I'm not sure if you're aware, but is in Pipeline 6809 that I'm working with the creators of to do some additional work on that as well. So there's a lot to explore. There's a lot to advance on as well. So it's not just about looking in the past, but it's about looking to the future, about what capabilities can be expanded upon. And I think the 6809 is a remarkable processor in that regard.
That's fascinating. It brings me also to some sort of weird segue. Is are only boomers and Gen Xers the only generation interested in this vintage computing and homebrew builds?
No.
At Cocoa Fest, I would say no, because we saw some younger people there, like people in their 20s, even some kids getting involved with their parents, but actually being interested in the hardware and the software side of things, not just playing, some retro game that dad played when he was a kid type thing. And I also agreeing with what Michael had said there. These systems are simple enough that you can understand the whole thing, whether it's the operating system itself or the hardware or even both. Whereas in a modern one, you've got all these pre-done libraries. You have absolutely no idea what's going on inside of them. You're just hoping whoever wrote it didn't put a bunch of bugs in. And I think it helps for the younger generation that they can learn how the computers actually work more at the level of the core of it all, as opposed to just here's a bunch of libraries, have fun type thing. So I think they get to learn operating system design and hardware design, et cetera, that is almost impossible on a modern 64-bit machine.
Also, it's not just games. They're really interested in going into the nitty-gritty of things.
Yeah, we had a few of them. Maybe that's the last Cocoa Fest. One was helping his dad making a portable Cocoa using batteries from drills and stuff, and actually powering the whole system and a portable screen, LCD screen. And it's all wireless using the wireless card that Sleepy made, or wireless chip. So you can actually wander around and actually log into things. So that's just one example.
Yeah, when I was in VCF Midwest, there was a young man that was about, I do believe he was 11 or 12, that he had formed a programming group at his school, and there was probably about 6 or 7 of these children with him that were in part of his group. And I know that they were interested in a lot. They were starting to get interested in the older Macs, like the G3 era, but they were also getting interested in the older systems, like the Commodores, the Ataris, the Coco, etc. And I know that when I gave him the option to learn how to solder, he jumped right on it because he wanted to learn how to solder and work on these old systems. So, and I know that there are other people that are younger, getting interested in this stuff, because for those people that have gone to VCF Midwest, Joe Z, he's in his mid-20s, and he started playing with this stuff when he was still in high school 10 years ago. There's another young man, Forrest. He actually wrote his first Atari 2600 game when he was 15, and he's in his mid-20s also. So there are younger people that are getting into this older stuff. I mean, they're far between than us older people, but still, there's quite a few younger people getting into it also. And I think a big part of it is, like Mike said, it's much easier to understand the full system, both the hardware and software side of the things, in a reasonably short amount of time. I mean, this isn't something that you could do with like the 16-bit systems of like the 8086 or the 68000. That would take a significantly longer period of time. But with good amount of studying, you can fully understand the 8-bit CPUs and the software within like a year or so of just casual study.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. The let me go back to my question list. So besides, I know that most of you, the Coco was one of your first computer, but what's the first after your youth has passed and you've grown as an adult? What was the first vintage computer that you decided to reacquire? Was it the Coco or was it something else?
I can answer mine fairly simply. I never stopped using the Coco. It's been something I've been actively working on since 1981 and has never stopped. I used to use it at work up until the early 2000s. We actually had it running a bunch of industrial line printers. So yeah, it's never really gone away. It's always been a hobby thing. It's also been a professional thing as well. And yeah, it's so darn fun. I just don't give it up.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I've never really stopped using my Atari 8-bit computers. For many years, I did use a emulator because I didn't really have the space and such to have a actual machine hooked up. But I still do have my original Atari 800, my original Atari 1200 XL, and my Atari 130 XE. I actually also have my original bought in 1985 a Commodore Plus 4. But yeah, I never really got out of classic computers from the time they were actually current computers until now.
And what about you, Boise?
Well, I said my first computer was a Coco, and technically my first computer, and I'll use that in quotes, was an Atari VCS. So we don't really think of those as computers. We think of those as game systems, but it's always sparked my imagination in terms of capabilities in gaming. So like Curtis, I've always been involved with the color computer, always had a color computer, but some of my interest has kind of pivoted into the Atari 8 bits, like the Atari 800, 65, 130XE, because I always was fascinated with the capabilities that the additional chips on those systems gave. Sort of like the GTIA, the Antic, those types of chips that bring in graphics and sound capabilities that the Coco never had. So I have a few of those, and that's about the extent. I don't have Apple IIs or anything like that because I just never did grow up with those. But because of my affinity for the Atari VCS, I do have some Atari 8 bits.
Yeah. Mikey?
Yeah, so pretty much like everybody else, we never got rid of our original Coco, even though from it was like the very late 80s, I was still using the Coco to do stuff. But from that point, I kind of shifted over to PC, but we still had the old Coco. It never went anywhere. So when I started becoming interested in the Coco again, I had actually um, been laid off at that time and went back to university to finish my computer science degree. And that's sort of when I thought, well, programming these projects in C or whatever is interesting, but I can actually, you know, like this is going back to what I said before. Even I can actually do cool stuff with my Coco. That's sort of how I got back to it. Now, I do want to uh, make one comment that came to mind while you guys were talking. Um, while our family computer was always the Coco, when the Timex Sinclair 1000 came out, my dad bought me one and said, "This is your computer." And
My condolences.
yeah, so I still had access to the Coco, and I couldn't really do that much with the TS1000, so I just went back to the Coco. So later on in life, now I've collected some machines. I have an Apple IIc. I was always in awe of the Sinclair QL. Have one of those, but I always go back to the Coco.
Yeah, let's talk about a bit about the hardware. I guess I can say I'm mostly a hardware guy. I do some software. I'm not an expert, although I do dabble in it, but I'll never be an expert like some of you guys for sure. But I'd like to know. Well, my experience mostly is right now the 6502 and the Z80. But why do you think there's such a I don't know if I should say small, but at least a fierce fan base for the 6809 CPU?
In my case, I think it's because it's a programmer's dream compared to most of the other 8-bits. You have 16-bit registers and 16-bit math, and you've got 2 stack pointers, and there's just a lot of hardware in there to use that makes programming easier. You can write code that is smaller and more efficient because of all the extra instructions and the indexing modes, and like the indexing modes. If you're familiar with PDP-11, it's pretty close to that, so it's quite expansive. So I think that's probably the main reason that it's then. And I think the reason it didn't take off more than it could have is because it was priced pretty high compared to some of the other 8-bits like the 6502 or the Z/Z80.
Mm-hmm.
The price of the chip was quite a bit more. It was more advanced, so there's a reason for that. But and it also came fairly late. So the 68000 was just coming online, the 886 was just coming online. So there's some 60-bit competition. And the price was kind of up in the middle between those two tiers. So it kind of had a short little window it had to fit in. And it did. I mean, it came out on the Fujitsu FM777 in Japan. It came out on the Thompson in France. The Vectrix game console used 6809. Williams Electronics used it for a lot of their arcade games in the early 80s, like Defender and Joust and that kind of stuff. So it was somewhat popular with the programmers as well. But I think the cost of it probably prohibited some other companies from using it. There was like 609 add-on boards for the Apple and a few others, and actually some of you guys in the panel here probably fiddled with those, give more detail on them. I just know their existence type thing. But
okay. Boise?
Yeah, I agree with what Curtis said. It was a great processor, but the price was, I don't remember what it was. Wasn't it, Curtis, like several times more than the
Yeah, I think it was like 5 times more than the 6502 was at the time, because the 6502 was made to be cheap.
Right. And 6502 was MOSTEC, and of course Motorola was the 6800 that the 6502 I think was created to compete against on price. And then the 6809 was just another Motorola processor that had more registers, more capability, hardware multiply, 2 stack pointers, things like that, and pretty nice orthogonal instruction set. But for whatever reason, besides price, I think just the amount of computers in the home computer space that went with the 6502 just blew away what was on the 6809. What the 6809 had going for it, I think, was that the color computer, which was the main system that it was used on here in the United States, was such a ubiquitous computer for most people. I grew up in a small rural town. I did not have access to a mall nearby which is really where you bought Commodore 64s and those computers at the time. But there was a Radio Shack in pretty much every small town. It was not an actual company store, it was a franchise. And so the ubiquity of that, the ubiquity of the catalog that Radio Shack sent in the mail, and the accessibility to your local Radio Shack store really gave the 6809 the boost that it has today, I think, because the Coco was such a widely accessible computer for people.
Okay. Anybody else have something to say about that? No? Okay. I've heard you talk about the different systems. Well, first of all, I didn't catch all the systems you mentioned, Curtis. About there's the Coco, there's the Dragon, which is basically a Coco, and you mentioned that the Vectrix also is
the Vectrix gaming system, the Vector based one is 6809.
what other computers were there? Because you look at the 6502 and the Z80. There's like a ton of computers
Yeah.
that had these chips, right? But
Yeah, there's the
somehow,
France had Thompsons. There was the TO8, TO9, I think, if I'm remembering the names
Yep.
correctly. But those had 6809s. The Fujitsu FM7 and 77, actually, some of those had dual 6809s. One controlled the graphics, one was the main computer. And they had, advanced sound chips and graphics chips and stuff added too. So it was quite a nice, especially under OS9, it was a really nice system. So there was, pockets of them that were quite good, but they were not the cheapest computers. They weren't the ones you were going to, get for $200 at a local.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
How many?
weren't a consumer product, basically.
Yeah. How many arcade machines use the 6809?
A lot.
Yeah.
So
The
many.
Williams games used it as a primary, but there was a ton of them that used it like as a sound coprocessor, along with say 68000. Mikey, you probably know a lot more of them than I do off the top of my head.
I didn't hear what you just said, Curtis. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying you probably know a lot more of the arcade machines that use the 6809 than I do. I just remember the Williams ones.
I don't. I'm not really that much of a game player, but I do know that a lot of the Williams pinball machines have 6809s in them. They had that for a while, but my comment was going to be to go the completely other direction. Not the home computers really. Talking about the Southwestern Technical Products and gimmicks and smoke signal broadcasting. Those companies had 6809 machines, but they were not for games. They just had
they're
terminals
expensive.
attached to them.
So, when you're programming the 6809, I know we're not at the software stage right now in the questions, but it is an interesting thing I'd like to compare. Is I know that cycle for cycle, megahertz for megahertz, between a 6502 and a Z80. I mean, the 6502 will probably outgun the Z80 because Z80 really takes so much cycle more to execute an instruction versus the 6502. What about the 6809?
You want to tackle one, Boise? Or
I'm really not that much of a Z80 expert to do a comparison, so I'll have to defer to someone else. I do know that I've seen comparisons, a litany of them that claim that, but I can't speak technically to that because I just don't have familiarity with that.
I can give you some because I have programmed 6502 in the past too. So the 6502 is optimized to be short instructions and quick, but they don't do much. And that's where the 6809 shines because its cycle counts on most instructions is quite a bit faster than the Z80 is at the same thing. As far as compared to the 6502, it's a bit of a wash at a first glance because some of the 6502 is a little bit faster, some of the 609 is a bit faster. But when you start adding all the extra instructions and indexing modes and extra registers and stuff, where you don't have to hit RAM as often, then you can, if you program it right, the 609 will almost always come out ahead. Now, if you take 6502 code and just directly translate it instruction for instruction, the 6502 will probably win. And I've some of the game ports that were done for the Coco, for example, were actually based on Apple II or Atari 6502 based games, literally instruction for instruction. They actually run a little bit slower because they're doing it the hard way. They're restricting themselves to like 8-bit offsets and not allowing the 16-bit offsets, or doing a software calculation of a multiplication where you could just use the mul instruction on the 6809. It's a single instruction that does a 8x8 unsigned multiply. So there's a bunch of things like that. So if you program for it specifically, the 6809 I think would win in almost all cases. But a lot of people, if they were under deadlines and stuff, they just took the fast programming route out, which is just converted instruction for instruction.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's actually an aspect to that. The 6809 was kind of, compared to the 6502, has a lot more 16-bit instructions that you can do. It has additional 16-bit registers and even 16-bit indexing. The 6502 only has 8-bit indexing, so you can only
just
go
self-modify code and stuff. Yeah,
plus or minus 120, 128. So this is sort of what Curtis was talking about. It's possible because the 6502 was sort of kind of based on the 6800. They're kind of the same. They only have have the eight. They only have one. Does 6800 have X and Y? I don't remember exactly. I know 6502 does. But if you're translating a program from 6502, you're only going to be doing things in 8-bit. You're not even doing anything with the
Yeah.
16-bit. So the advantage there is if you're doing a 16-bit calculation on 6502, you'll have to do, you know, add B with carry, and then or you'll have to do add B and then add A with carry. You'll have to do multiple instructions where you could just do add D on a 6809. And that the 16-bit indexing is extremely powerful. Um, Sorry, I didn't say on 6809 is extremely powerful.
Mm.
And Motorola did really design 6809. They really had high-level languages in mind. So when Curtis started out and said that 6809 is the programmer's dream, um, the result of that approach was to have the better 16-bit support. So that's where if you're translating a program from 6502 to 6809, you can gain additional performance when instead of doing those multiple 8-bit calculations, if you can do something in 16 bits, you should, because that'll give you performance gain.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that with the 65, I'm much more familiar with the 6502 in hardware and software than I am with the 6809. But I do know that with the 6502, most instructions will complete in 1 to 5 clock cycles, and a couple of them will take like 7 or 8, depending on page boundaries and such. And the 6809, if memory serves me, it's pretty similar. There isn't much of a leeway in there. But for the Z80, some instructions can take up to 30 to 40 clock cycles. So this is why the general consensus is that a 2 megahertz 6502 is roughly equivalent to a 4.5 to 4.7 megahertz Z80.
Mm-hmm.
80.
Is it 80? Yeah.
Yeah, 88. Well, Z80 and the Z. The,
8080.
Oh, the 8080.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a much more efficient thing. So, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that when you're talking about terms of efficiency of not just the instructions themselves and how you program them, but the underlying hardware is also much more efficient for both the 6502 and 6809 relative to the Z80 and the 8080 and such.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Which brings me to a small little segue to the new kid on the block, and that's the 6309. What's the story behind that?
Boys, you want to tackle that one? Or you want me to do that one?
I think you should do that, Curtis. I mean, I can do it, but I think you're.
I can
You're
chime
well
in a little bit
qualified.
as well.
Go for it.
Curtis, go ahead.
Okay. The official story, as far as we can tell, Hitachi was a second source for 6809s even back in the day for Motorola, as were a few other companies, just like Intel had AMD and a bunch of others. So they originally just did clones. They were literally the exact same process, the exact same chip. They just second sourced it. Later on, they got requests for doing CMOS low power versions of it. And by that time, Motorola was kind of getting ramped up to 68,000s and a bunch of things that they just didn't have the capacity. So they asked if Hitachi could do it. So it was announced, I think it's in the October 1985 Hitachi catalog, is when they first announced the HD 6309. And all that claimed to be was that this is going to take 1/10 the power because it's CMOS instead of NMOS. And it has a special sleep mode that'll take 1/100 the power, waiting for interrupts to come in. So it was meant to be more like a microcontroller. And so it went on sale in Japan probably about late 85, early 86. And it was used as a replacement CPU because it was, ran much cooler, et cetera. It also clocked higher. The original Motorola 6809 could only run 1.5, 2 megahertz as official speeds. The 6309 came out at 1, 2, and 3 megahertz. So you had that extra speed grade. And they were quite capable of overclocking to 4 to 5 pretty regularly and still are.
Oh,
So that was a nice little feature about it too. But then and this actually was found on Japan way before we found out about it here in North America. So the Fujitsu guys, because they were using 6809s, they were putting 6009s into some of their machines, and then all of a sudden they were getting weird crashes on just certain programs that were not happening on the 6809 side. And they started, disassembling the code of these commercial programs to figure out. And what they'd done is that they'd use some unofficial instructions, some of the extra parts of the instruction set that do a slightly slower version of an existing thing, like branches was a popular one. And they'd use that as a timing thing for certain hardware timing and stuff to reduce the size of the code. And they figured out it's reacting differently. So then they started fiddling around, like they'd run this, unknown instruction and then monitor what happened to the registers afterwards. All of a sudden they're discovering some of them are changing and they're going, well, that shouldn't be. So then they started really experimenting and they started figuring out, oh, that's adding some other number to this number, or it's doing a divide or something like that. And they started just going through all the opcodes and trying to figure out exactly what it was. And they spent quite a bit of time doing it. I don't know if they had inside help from Hitachi or not, because the rumor is that Motorola, after Hitachi had gotten the new 609 chip done and sent it to Motorola, they went, what did you add all this extra stuff for? We didn't ask you to do that. And basically, they were not allowed to talk about it, but they're not going to design the whole chip here. And they were asked for a low power one and rated at 3 megahertz, and that still accomplished that. So they just sold it as is with no documentation about extra registers, native mode, hardware divide, and a plethora of other things that they were added onto the chip. So basically, that was found out and published in a magazine in Japan called OFM in 1988. And then, Buzz, do you remember the guy's name that posted it across? I don't remember his name.
It's a Japanese name. I was looking for it as you're speaking.
Okay. Well, if you find it, you can pipe in. But he basically came on to the 6809 use group, Newsnet group, and mentioned, so have you guys found all the hidden stuff on the 639 chip yet? Because a few people in North America were also replacing them for overclocking or for cool purposes, like to cool the machine down. And we're going, what are you talking about? And then he published the entire article that came with that OFM magazine in 1980. This is in 1992 in April when this happened. And there's like a block memory transfer and a whole bunch of things. And then a few people that had 639s in the machines already, like Kevin Darling, who's also very active in the OS9 community. He decided to try it out and he published the results on CompuServe and Delphi and elsewhere and goes, yes, this definitely does work. All these new registers are here and this block memory move works and all this other stuff. So that's when we found out about it. And that's when we started working on Nitrous 9. And there was another product called Power Boost by Chris Burke that also did similar.
I did pull up the information. So the additional instruction set was first written about in the April 1988 issue of OFM. And it was translated by Hiratsuku Kakagawa in, I think, in 1992. Or it doesn't say when it was translated, but I do remember it was around 1991 or 1992 when the United States folks were aware of the 6309's additional instructions. But it had apparently in Japan had already been talked about in April of 1988. So,
yep. So that a 4-year lead on us.
Something else too. There were 6309s being sold in the Rainbow magazine in the late 80s, in like 87, 88, as a low power alternative to the 6809. But the instruction set, the additional instructions weren't known at that time by us. It was only being sold as a CMOS variant that would run with lower power. I remember that specifically, but I don't think it was the instruction set was known at that point.
So because of the extra instructions, didn't this cause some sort of litigation with Hitachi and Motorola?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think Motorola had kind of hinted that would happen if they revealed everything off the start, because they weren't contracted to do all that stuff. But by the time it leaked out 4 years later or 3 years later, then I think at that time Motorola was so much into 680XO stuff and even some of the RISC stuff at that point. It was like, well, we don't even manufacture 6809s anymore, so we don't really care. I think is basically what happened.
So the current instruction of the 6809 and the 6309, they're cycle accurate, basically.
They can be. There's 2 modes on the 6309. There's what's called emulation mode, which is what it boots into, and that basically the instruction counts, cycle counts are exactly the same between the two. The extra instructions, the extra registers are still there. You can still access them. In fact, some of them are a little bit slower than they could be, but it's basically backwards compatible cycle count wise with the 6809. But if you turn on native mode, then some of the instructions get faster, and how much depends on the instruction.
Oh, and register-wise, what's different?
I can show you on screen. Okay.
Yeah, from what I understand, on a 14 drive across Canada, Curtis can fill the entire time between the 6309 and
Yeah.
Nitrous 9 ease of use.
Yeah, I almost need a longer drive than 22 hours now for that. But
Yeah. I can get references for that.
so anyway, this is an example of the indexed addressing mode table. Now I don't know how well the gray stuff is showing up here because it's a fairly light gray.
Yeah.
But you can see here, like we've got this new W register they're mentioning here, and you can actually do offsets based on W, but the cycle counts are actually faster than the equivalents are in the 6809 with other 16-bit registers. So it's actually that particular register is even optimized more than normal. And over here, like the original 6809 can offset by 3 different accumulators, A and B, which are 8-bit accumulators, or they can be combined into a 16-bit signed D accumulator, and you can add that to any index or stack register, X, Y, S, or U. But the 639 adds in these extra 8 and 16-bit registers so that you can actually have several of these. If you want to look up 2 tables, like if you want to do a table, source table, and a destination table, you can have independent index registers and independent offsets in each in case the data sizes aren't the same. You also can do the W post increment decrement type thing. Also, again, with faster, there's also the indirect versions of almost all of those as well.
So you can actually get 2 16-bit accumulators.
Yes. In fact, you can combine them to 32-bit for certain specific instructions. Mul D,
Really?
which is a 16 by 16 signed multiply, and div Q, which divides a 32-bit signed Q register by a 16-bit signed value. So you can do hardware divide too.
You can't do that with the other CPUs that I've worked with.
Well, even the 6809, you can only do an 8 by 8 unsigned multiply. That's the only one of those we have.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
So here's the new programming model, which is the actual register set, basically. And like I said, I don't know how well the gray stuff is showing up here.
I'm seeing it on my screen. I don't know how people are seeing it over the web, but it looks good.
Yeah. So this white part here, A, B, and can be combined into D. That's 6809 standard. E, F, and W has been added. You can also add all 4 of those together to form Q. X, Y, U, and S. X and Y are index registers. U and S can be used as index registers or stack pointers, though they behave a little bit differently with condition code flags. You have this new V register. Now, this is a bit of a unique one here. It's a 16-bit register. You can't do any instructions on it directly except for transferring to and from it or exchanging it with another.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular one will actually hold its value after a reset signal goes through. So you can use that for debugging. For example, if you have a program that is crashing, you have no idea why, maybe it's an interrupt or something, you can be incrementing that value or storing certain values, and you see where in the code it was. And then when it locks up and dies on you, just hit the reset. And then you can actually read that value back to figure out roughly where in the code the problem happened. So it actually retains itself over a reset, which is really, really handy. We used that in Nitrous 9 quite a bit in the old days. You've also got illegal instruction trapping added now for both divide by 0 and illegal instruction. That didn't exist on the 609 at all. Native mode, where you can actually reduce the instruction counts of quite a few of the instructions. The W is a bit of an oddball too, because basically A, B, and D on the 6809 are accumulators. That's what they're designed for. X, Y, U, and S are stack and index pointers. The W one can double as kind of a mixture of both. It doesn't have all the accumulator instructions. It doesn't have all the indexing instructions, but the one register you can use as both cases. You can use it as an accumulator with mathematical functions, and then suddenly use it as an index register afterwards. So it's kind of a unique beast, that one. And there's a bunch of other things. I mean, I could go on for 20 hours, apparently. So, and we've got an expanded push and pull, like most, I think both 6502 and the Z80, Z80, I think, if I remember correctly, when you're pushing stuff onto the stack or popping off the stack or whatever, you basically have to do one register at a time per instruction. Is that right? Am I remembering that correct?
Yes.
We have a
secondary... it depends, but yeah, on the Z80, when you push, for example, the accumulator, it pushes also the flags But yeah,
Oh, they can-
basically it's one at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, because in our case we have a push instruction, the actual opcode for the instruction. This is on the use stack, which is the user stack, and also the S, the hardware stack. You pick which one you want to do, but then you have all these bit flags for the other things, and you can just set them on and off. If you want to push just one register, you can. You can push 8 of them at a time, and that actually comes into some tricky programming stuff on the 6-at-9 known as stack blasting, which we probably won't go into too much detail here. But anyway, you can just save if you have a subroutine you're writing and you only need to save X, Y, and U, for example, and the other ones you don't care. You can just push S, Y, and U. That's a single instruction that does it, so it only takes 1 cycle per byte, plus the overhead of the instruction decoding itself.
That's efficient. Wow.
Anything else I should point out, Boise, that's like really 639 cool?
You've pretty much covered it. The extra registers, there's the TFM instruction. I don't know if you touched on that because I had walked away for a second.
I think I briefly mentioned it, but if you want to go
Yeah.
into a bit more detail.
Well, it's a block copy. It's a very flexible instruction that allows you to move, I think, up to 256 bytes at a time.
Nope, up
From,
to 64K.
64K. Okay, thank you. That's right, because it's the W register that you load, right?
Yeah.
For the so that's a 16-bit value. Yeah, that's a very interesting instruction. It is used quite a bit, I know, in OS 9 level 2 to speed up a number of different things.
Yeah, the nice thing about it is it'll copy memory, like say if you're doing screens, like scrolling or something like that, or copying a shape.
right.
But it also lets you do one where the source of the destination doesn't move. And because the 689 639 is memory mapped I/O versus ports like say Z80 or an 8080, you can blast stuff to say a disk controller and just have it copy a 256 byte sector over, and it just does it in one instruction.
There are a couple other oddities about the 6309. There's that V register.
Yeah, I did mention that one.
And then there's there's a vector, I think, that traps illegal instructions, right?
Yeah.
So
There's a bunch of bit manipulation instructions too, which I won't go into because there's a ton of them, but those are all new too. Now I'll stop sharing so we see everybody.
So it's kind of it's a wonderful CPU. It really has a lot of stuff on it. So if I take, for example, this chip and I decide to build upon it and say, let's push it to, I don't know, 4 megahertz.
Yeah.
I would simply blow the 6502 out of the water at that same speed. I mean, I have so much more that I can do. I'd be able to, I don't know where to start. So much there's potential in the 6809. It's incredible.
Yeah, and the 609 in particular, I mean, that takes it to a whole other level. I mean, it's not perfect. There's a few, like the orthogonal stuff that Boise was talking about earlier. There's certain bits that have like certain equivalents, but don't have others that are common to the 6809 set.
Yeah.
So there's a few little, not gotchas. You just have to work around them a little bit, but generally it's a really nice chip. It almost feels like a 16-bit, full-blown 16-bit chip.
Yeah. Before I go to the software portion, I do have, since I'm a hardware, more of a hardware guy. I'm going to build the 6809 or 6309 actually. I mean, there's a lot of chips that I won't be able to use because they're no longer available. Like, for example, the MMU. If I want to do some memory banking, I'll have to use latches probably to address if I want 512 or a meg or 2 meg of memory. If I want to use an operating system like Nitrous OS or Flex or whatever, they're using the MMUs, right?
Flex is not. I know it's 9 level 1 does not.
Okay. How can you address more than 64K of memory with those?
Not directly in the OS, I don't believe. Like Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong on Flex there. I think it basically, if you had more than that, it was just like for RAM drives and stuff like that, you'd have some sort of banking thing.
Yeah, the Flex has no way to access that. So.
Okay.
And Boise, I mean, level 1, you had RAM disk drivers. I know like the JR&R bankers used to have 256 or 512, and it was used as a RAM disk beyond 64K, but I don't think there wasn't any versions of level 1 that kind of used that to their advantage, was there? Beyond that?
no, not that I know of. I will say that if you want to build a 6309 based system with more than 64K of RAM, you can do that and come up with some type of banking or dynamic address translation mechanism. But the easiest way to test out your board would be to port Flex to it, which should be very easy, and OS9 Level 1, which both do not address any more than 64K. So the porting of those operating systems should be relatively straightforward and easy, I would think, aside from any memory map value that you might do that might be different.
Yeah, I just need to basically copy whatever's on the Coco 3, I guess, except that I can't map whatever's on the Gimme. Well, basically copy the Coco 2 would probably be easier. But does Coco 2s, can they go more than 64K of memory?
It's been done with bank switching, which is 32K chunks at a time that you map in.
Okay, so 32. Good.
And I've seen them up to 1 meg doing that. But like I said, it's usually used as a RAM drive, because if you're trying to run an OS and you're swapping literally half the memory out from under it, that usually causes problems. So you're restricted when you can shut interrupts off, and then you can access the RAM drive. Now, Boise, you've done more porting to non-Coco systems than anybody else on the panel here. So I'm hoping you might have some insight on stuff, because you've done stuff like for the Atari 8-bits with the 6809 satellite board and things. So
Yeah. If you want to do OS9 Level 2 or Nitrous 9 Level 2, you can certainly take the approach of emulating what the Gimme does in terms of block size. The Coco 3, for instance, you can have up to 512K of 2 mega RAM, and you can map in 8K blocks into a 64K address space. And so you could have 8 slots in your 64K address space that would hold 8K blocks.
Yeah.
I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to get into this now, but there are people that advocate that would like to see different block sizes. And I have done ports of OS9. The ports of OS9 that I've done of Level 2 have been to systems that have a consistent 8K block size. That's pretty easy to handle, because the porting that's being done is through disassembled source code, or it was a machine code that's been disassembled to source code. And that was basically the Coco 3 Level 2 port, which was based on 8K blocks. It's the easiest thing to do. If you went to something like 4K blocks or 2K blocks,
That's
a
small.
lot of the source code would have to be rewritten and refactored to handle that.
yeah. There were versions that did, like I think Gimmicks was a 2K block, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember.
2 or 4, I think it was 4K. And then I think the 6829 is 2K blocks, right? The Motorola.
Yeah, Motorola MMU chip. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Can't remember off the top of my head.
I think it's 2K blocks.
The SWTPC was 4K.
Okay. Well, if you're familiar with those, go ahead, Mikey.
But being so small, isn't it like bothersome to manage such small window of a bank, the bank window of 4K or even 2K? I'd say I'd argue 8K also is small, but then again, I may be wrong.
I mean, it's a trade-off. How much memory do you want to use for your paging versus, how many blocks do you want to have?
Yeah.
And at least this is the way that we talk about it in modern terms. I'm actually kind of thinking about not 6809 when I say that, but x86. You can, but back in those days, I think they just, maybe they had reasons for it. I don't think we know what those reasons were. Why the Gimme was 8K. Why Southwestern Technical Products use 4K. I don't know. I don't know exactly. At least for the SWTPC, it's because of the RAM chip they used for the register. 70 LS189, which is like I don't remember how big that RAM chip is. It's a pretty small one. So
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the reason I'm asking is because yesterday I watched the Coco Tech episode about not Flex, but I'll never say it.
Nitrous 9.
Nitrous
Nitrous
9.
9, thank you. And you were mentioning, Curtis, that the more memory you have, the better. And for that,
It's the management of the memory within a task. 'Cause, I mean, the 639 is still an 8-bit chip, so it can directly access 64K. Period.
Mm-hmm.
The MMU just tells it to present which part of your 512 or 1
Yeah.
meg or whatever that you're actually going to see. So you can lessen memory fragmentation if you're trying to load in blocks with like subroutine modules and stuff like that. If you're doing 8K blocks and you load a module that's only 512 bytes, well, you're kind of making this other 7.5K useless unless you start merging them all together on the fly. So a smaller one makes that a bit better so that you can manage a specific 64K workspaces memory allocation a lot better and save memory on the long run that way. On the other hand, you have to add in more and more bits to your MMU to keep track of which ones are going where.
Mm-hmm.
And like in the Coco's case, the Coco 3's case, we also have the DAT register, which is basically which set, or task register, I should say, which map there is. There's two of them you can pick from. So there's a system map normally, and then there's a generic process map for user apps. And we just flood that with whatever the next process up in the queue is. Some of the other machines that Mikey had mentioned actually had a lot more than just 2 tasks. They'd have like up to 32 tasks. So every process in the system has its own MMU settings for its own memory map, and it just flipped 1 byte and it instantly changes everything over. And there's another one that even handled hardware interrupts. So it instantly, as soon as it got a hardware interrupt, it would flip over to the system interrupt controlling part of the code there and just immediately start running it as if it was a brand new computer type thing. So there's a couple different ways to approach it. The Coco's case, I like it because you can load that many more programs in 2 meg. And most of the programs I'm running are not tiny little, 25 bytes or 150 bytes or something like that. They're usually K and K and K. They're full-blown apps. So in that case, it made more sense to do that. But on some of the microcontroller-based stuff that OS9 was getting into, it was a lot more lean and mean. And in those particular cases, it might be smarter to have the smaller MMU blocks, just so that your process can have a lot more stuff linked in without having to get complicated.
Here's a question for you. Your apps that you're going to be that you generally run within OS9, Nitrous 9, etc. I mean, what size are they? I mean, are they something that's like in the under 2K size, like 4K size? I mean, the thing
it's all over the place.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if the majority of the apps, okay, are under 8K, but there's a significant number of them that are over 4K, then 8K paging does make sense.
Yeah. It depends. Like OS9 was used a lot as a microcontroller type situation environment where it was controlling various pieces of hardware and stuff and running in the background without even having a screen on it. Those ones generally you'd be writing much tighter little code because you're like trying to control a motor or something like that. So those tended to be a lot smaller. You have a few utilities that were built in that were probably 2K or less, just to access certain functions. But on the Coco's case, it was meant to run like applications like a word processor or a game or something like that. And most of those take like 16K, 32, 48, 56, type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're also able to make a decent game in 8 or 16K. So having 1 or 2 banks devoted to that application or task is a reasonable amount. But when you're talking like a 4K page size, when you're talking 16K, you're talking of four pages of memory. So you're dealing with the pages much more at 4 than you are at 2.
Yeah, Boise, when you were at Microware, they probably didn't have any 609 systems really left there at that time. But did you ever talk to the engineers and say, like, for gimmicks and SWTPCs and some of the other ones there, what?
I didn't really get those conversations with the guys there because like I said a lot had gone past that. But we did have a gimmick system there, and it was a 4K. It was a level 2 system with 4K pages. I remember that. But the my point of view on this is that 8K pages on a 512K system, which is nominal. It doesn't matter to me if it's 4K or 8K. Really, you're not going. Typically, you don't even reach using all the memory on the system anyway to even worry about it.
Okay.
And it's just that not that big of a concern. I think 8K is a happy medium. I think 16K is a little too big. 4K is probably okay, but then you start running into the doubling of the number of bits that you need to represent the task. And there are ways around that. As Curtis indicated, the task registers are mapped. Both tasks are mapped into the I/O space on the Coco 3, but you could use a windowing technique where you could poke into a value, and then all of a sudden the task registers for that would appear at one particular point in the I/O space. In fact, that's how the F256 does it on the Phoenix that I just did the level 2 port on. So you could have a bunch of task map registers, but only one place in the I/O space where they reside, and use a windowing technique to bring them in. But I think 8K is fine. I really do. We've been using it on the Coco 3 for 30-something years, and the only thing that I can think of is that you might have a program that it gets into the situation where you have, say, a 25K program, right? You load it into memory and you're wasting 7K because you've got to allocate 32K of memory space for the application to run. You just feel like that there's memory being wasted, right? But in reality, you've got so many other 8K blocks free typically that it's not that big of a deal. It's just it's a small amount of memory that you have to deal with that's being quote unquote wasted. So I think the benefit of going to 8K blocks is it's a good happy medium. It's simplistic, and if you're talking about porting OS 9 level 2, you don't have to go and refactor and rewrite the kernel to handle a different block size case. Because Curtis, if we had to adapt the kernel and all of the utilities in level 2 to 4K and 2K block sizes, that would be a lot of work, and I don't feel like doing that for sure.
No, I don't either.
Hasn't there been
that some of
anybody
the
that's
system
done that?
tables do cover 2 and 4K, like there's extra space reserved in there in the defines and at the core kernel, but all the apps are basically hard coded for the 8K. So go ahead, Mike.
Didn't somebody already work on that a little bit? Maybe not as complete as you were talking about. Thought
I
somebody
saw
was
that.
porting
Yeah,
to something that had a
there was
smaller
an
block size.
MC09 port, a level 2 MC09 port that somebody did. I've seen in the source code that I think had a different page size. Maybe I'm misremembering it, but at least the Nitrous 9 source code that I'm working in, I see evidence all the time when I was doing the port to the F256. Clearly, there are no pound defines to say, if the page size is 4K versus 8K. The instructions are intrinsically set to deal with 8K pages. Now, I do remember when I worked at Microware, looking at the 6809 OS 9 source code, that source code that was commented by Microware was able to be conditionally assembled to handle different page sizes. But Nitrous 9 is disassembled from the 6809 level 2 Coco port, and that was fully 8K only. So you're only getting that source code that's bound to the 8K page size or 8K block size.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's left that actually has the variable block size is the process descriptor, which is a 512 byte block of data explaining what every process is. That does have room for the smaller blocks, so that are unused.
Does. But the code itself that manipulates the DAT, it's all assuming 8K block sizes, and that would be a lot of work to
change it,
conditionalize it out so that would handle the flexibility of the block sizes.
Okay. So there's no point in getting 32 or even more windows per se, because you're going to end up managing more than it's worth.
Yeah. You're also going to have the whole issue of you're talking about having 8K block sizes with like 512 or 1K bytes used, and you're wasting 7K, but you still got another 280K that's not being used at all. So
exactly, that's my point.
It doesn't make much of a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of it that way, though.
And an OS 9. Go ahead, Curtis, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the way the MMU works in the Coco 2, having the 8K block size, if the original Coco came with 6 bits assigned to each MMU block, so 512K maximum, and we've done third-party upgrades since they add the extra 2 bits. So 8 bits, if you design it right up front for that, you'll be able to get 2 meg of RAM in there quite easily without having to break anything. If you want to go beyond that, you got to start doing weird stuff. But
And I was going to say that at least for OS 9, you're going to run out of system RAM probably before you even use all of the available RAM for the applications, because the operating system itself reserves 64K for its own internal data structures, path descriptors, process descriptors, anything like that. And so what happens is if you fork too many processes, you will actually, the system itself, its 64K address space will be subsumed by all these data structures, and you won't be able to do anything, fork any additional processes anyway. So you could run out of system RAM. The kernel could run out of RAM to manage the processes before you even use all of the available RAM anyway. So that's why I think AK block sizes is fine. It's not where the problem lies, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I should mention the reason of the 64K system, because some people have said, well, why don't you just expand it and have a subtask or something, which the graphic system on the Coco 3 does kind of do. But the main thing is that OS 9 was designed not only to be a multi-user, multitasking operating system, it was also meant to be real time. So you have to respond to interrupts in real time. And if you start spreading the system into multiple side tasks, and an interrupt comes in, you have to figure out, well, what do I have to map in to handle this hard drive interface or this serial port or whatever is coming in. And that's the reason, to keep it in a real time situation where it reacts within a predicted amount of time and quickly. They wanted to keep the system task itself into one 64K space of its own.
And that clears up a lot of misconceptions I had in my head about the bank size window. The window of 8K is more than enough, as they say. Sorry, I'm cracking my back. I would like to talk about storage. We're still in the hardware for now, and we're heading to the software after that question. Floppies are kind of hard to get these days. Hard drives even harder. Well, there's SD cards with whatever interface we're going to use, like the CH376, which can be interesting. What is the modern operating systems that you're talking about? OS 9, the Nitrous 9, and then Flex. Does it use a particular type of mechanism for its storage devices, or it's ubiquitous and it can whatever method that you, depending on the driver you have, you can use whatever you want? I don't know if it's clear what I just said, or I just messed up everything. But
you're talking about operating system limitations as to how, like, the size of a maximum size of a storage device, I think.
Yes, but also the type of medium that you can use.
You mean like how it's accessed and such? How
Yes.
it's reference?
Yes, that too. It's the whole shebang of do I get to access the physical media directly or indirectly through an interface. Actually, I should rephrase that.
Basically, what I think you're trying to ask is, does the Nitrous 09 and Flex access the hardware directly, or does it access it through a driver that is completely
Abstracted?
From
Yeah.
So
Exactly. So that is exactly what I meant, and I've messed up the question. Thank you, Sloopy.
no problem.
do you want to start with the simplest operating system first?
Sure.
Yes.
That would be Flex, because once you get into Nitrous 9, it can get a little bit more complicated. So Flex is really an operating system out of the late 1970s. So you basically had the disk controller sitting on we're talking about Motorola, it's all memory mapped. It's sitting at some address, E1014 or something like that on the 6809 systems. So there's a driver that handles read a sector, write a sector, seek to a particular track, recalibrate. That's kind of, for Flex, all that you have. And there's there's a lot of room for flexibility and so you have a disk drive, it has the head that moves back and forth. That's all you can do. But you can extend that to a hard drive if you want, because it's only tracks and sectors. So there's a probably a limitation. It doesn't really have no. It doesn't have a limitation actually on the number of sectors. It can be 0 to 255, and the same with tracks. So you could go all the way from from a floppy disk up to a hard drive, SD card, whatever. So people have on the Flex side, people have definitely interfaced to hard drives. There was a hard drive available from Southwestern Technical products, that the Western Digital, what is it, 1010 or something like that controller, I think is the extends the floppy controller into hard drive. More modern people really just sort of I think stick with double density 80 track floppy. They use Gotex a lot, but there were IDE controllers. But from Flex's point of view, you have a driver that knows how to talk to the hardware, and you have a file management system as well. But I think people have interfaced SD cards, but the more modern, larger storage is IDE based. So I guess you go IDE to compact flash or IDE to SD card or something like that. So that's going to be aside from the basic ROM, that's going to be your simplest operating system. That at least for the storage. So I kind of tried to answer all of your questions at once. What do you want any further depth or questions on any of that before we move on to OS9 and Nitrous 9? It's going to get more complicated.
Okay, so let's go for it. Let's go for which would be the next one that's a step more complicated.
Well, OS9 Nitrous 9 will be the same because it's the same file system.
Okay.
Boise, how familiar are you with the RBF stuff? That's the one I'm a little bit rusty on, but I probably could wing it if I had to. But you might know more about it off the top of your head.
Well,
because you did drive wires, so you're quite familiar with some of
right. So let's. I think Frederick. One of the things I think that I thought I heard you in your question was, and maybe I missed it, was what is the preferred method of storage, or is that also what you're asking? Like, what should you?
There was that in my question also. Yes.
I would not worry about floppy drives at all. I would focus on SD cards as the main storage mechanism, and use a traditional, I guess, an SPI interface to talk to that. As far as the software goes, all you do as the hardware designer is tell us what the spec is. How do you talk to the SD card? If it's an SPI interface, there's a protocol that, in fact, I just worked on a driver for, again, the F256, since it's so fresh in my mind. It has an SD card, excuse me, and I just wrote a driver to talk to it over the SPI bus. That would be the easiest way. There's also mechanisms like DriveWire, which is a serial-based protocol that you could use to attach virtual disks from the server. Aside from that, storage-wise, there's compact flash, IDE, although that feels a little old at this point, and I think SD card is the best way to go.
What's interesting with the SD card, I just found a chip, the CH376, which actually converts the SPI to a parallel interface. So basically, you just address 8 bits at a time.
That's nice.
And it does a conversion, and it talks to the SD card straight away, and that's it.
Oh, so it actually does the actual low-level talking to the SD card.
Exactly.
So all you do is you interface to that chip through some high-level mechanism.
Yeah, no bit banging, nothing.
Yeah, that is actually quite nice, because the driver I wrote is doing the actual byte banging, if you will, right?
Yeah.
The whole protocol, the command set that you send to the SD card to get it initialized and then figure out how fast it can go. It's a lot of back and forth. If you used a hardware component like that, that would be make driver riding very, very easy, whether it's OS 9 or Flex or whatever. It'd be a no-brainer.
Cool.
And you're wondering about limitations on the size of the structures that NitroSign supports for disk type devices?
Well, I don't think it's going to be an issue for standard cards, I guess, but there must be a limit to the operating systems.
24 bits.
Yeah, you have 32 bits as far as byte addressing goes, but you got 24 bits as far as 256 byte sectors goes, which is what the OS 9 for the Coco Level 2 was based on. OS 9 68K gets up to larger size sectors, but basically, if you use the maximum number of sectors that's allowed, and everything's done logical sector number. It doesn't use cylinders and tracks internally at all. It's just like I want sector 55 or 5010 or whatever.
Yeah.
And the old days, it would translate that to the old cylinder head sector thing. Nowadays, most like SCSI drives and ADI drives all work with logical sector numbers. So you just have to translate between the size of the sectors. But if you actually allocated with clusters, like more than one sector per cluster, which is pretty well every modern OS says that. I think if I remember correctly, the maximum size was 4 gig for an RBF partition.
How much?
4 gig.
4
gigabytes.
Okay,
That's right.
oh, it's more than enough, right?
Yeah. And if you have one SD card, you can create multiple device descriptors, as they're called, which is kind of a little packet of information that tells you, or tells the driver, how to access this particular one, what driver is required for it, because you have different mixed hardware in the same system. But you could actually have, offsets. So like my, drive 0 is going to point to the first 4 gig of my SD card, and the second one is going to point to the second 4 gig. So you can actually, stack multiple drives,
virtual disks within the card. Yeah.
They were like partitions would be the better term.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, true. So if I put you in an arena, who would win in OS wise? OS 9, Nitrous 9, or Flex?
I would say OS 9, Nitrous 9. Nitrous 9 is just an optimized version of OS 9, created originally for the 639, thanks to Boise's efforts over the last 15 years. It's been backported to the 6809, so a lot of the extra stuff and optimizations that we did in the original 609 version are now in the 6809 version as much as they can be too. So it's improved in performance over what like Tandy Microware did back in the day too. So it's but basically they're pretty well, they're like twins almost, not quite fraternal twins.
What would be my best choice though if I want to have an operating system on my system that I'm designing? Because obviously it might not be fully Coco compatible.
Either operating system can be ported. I would not. I prefer OS 9. That's what I know. I think it is superior in a lot of ways to Flex. No offense to Mikey. I think he would even agree that. But I think having both should be the goal. And there's even something called Phusix, which is it's more of a Unixy operating system. I mean, you can. I would, if I were you, I would not concern. I mean, obviously you want to get OS 9 running on your board. I think it'd be easy to do. But if I were you, I would advocate for as many operating systems as you can. It would just be bonus. And I would say that the hardware design that especially with this chip that you mentioned, right, for the SD card, it sounds like it's going to make it easier for people to port operating systems over because you're using high-level hardware that's going to isolate and abstract out a lot of the low-level stuff that we would have to deal with as drivers. So it should make porting any operating system easier. Probably OS 9, Curtis, you would agree, would be probably the quickest one to get up and running because it's pretty amenable to being ported just by its architecture.
Okay. And so it would be fairly simple in the sense that the BIOS, I just create a minimal BIOS that would boot off the card, and thank you very much. The rest is done through the operating system that loads up, and I do whatever I need to do.
Yeah,
but I don't need to have BASIC like Coco. Does it do some calls on BASIC?
No. But let me ask you this. So do you plan on having Flash on this board or anything like that, or what would be your ROM?
Well, it will be a flash drive. It will be not a drive. Sorry, it will be a flash. Yes, but it more act like like a ROM basically.
Right, but how much flash are you talking about having?
Well, right now I have 128Ks,
Okay, yeah.
which are going to be probably limited to whatever amount I need.
So if I can talk about this because this is fresh in my mind with the port that I just did. So on the Coco, when you talk about the Coco booting OS 9, and Curtis, correct me if I'm wrong, if I make a mistake here, but the Coco has 4,608 bytes of boot track that is traditionally used to bring up the operating system. And that's not a lot of memory. They did it. They crammed the boot kernel and another module in to make it happen. But that code is very specific to the Coco. If you want to boot OS 9 on a what I would call a modern 6809 board and you have 120K of flash, what I did for the F256 is I ported OS 9 level 1 to the F256. That is the hardware that is the 6809 board with there's different hardware. And then I flashed OS 9 level 1 and a little booter program that runs under OS 9. And that is my booter to boot either OS 9 level 1 or level 2 off of an SD card or drive wire or the cartridge that they have. So my point is, if you have a lot of flash, if you have 128K of some size of that, and not just limited to say a 32K flash or a 16K flash, your booter could literally be the operating system that you ported. It doesn't have to be some special subset of code that knows how to write to a console and fidgets around with the SD card specifically. You can actually use the operating system itself to boot the operating system, or use OS 9 level 1 to boot Phuzix or
level 2 or
yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's the approach I would take on a modern implementation.
And that's a good point, Boise, because I completely forgot. One of the other design goals for Microware was that OS 9 was going to be ROMable, because in embedded systems, that's
correct. Yeah,
you could run it with no drives at all, literally.
That's right. That's exactly what this booter I wrote did. In fact, I was going down the path of writing a booter for the F256, and I said, okay, I have to write some code to write to the I/O to the console, because you want to see the booter print something. Here's the options, a menu system to show you what operating system, what devices to boot from. Then I was going to write code to talk to the SD card, code to write to driver. I'm like, why am I doing all this when the operating system is already there and I've ported it and I have enough room in flash? I could just flash the operating system. So it's like I had this moment of realization that I'm recreating stuff I don't have to recreate. So
basically, what you're saying is put the kernel for the OS, whether it's OS 9, Nitrous 9, or Flex, into the ROM in the first place, so that the only thing that you really need to add beyond that is the driver for the mass storage device.
Correct. So what I do for OS 9 is I have this. I'm not using Phuzix or Flex as my booter operating system. I'm using OS 9 level 1. I have the driver for DriveWire. I have the driver for the SD card. I have the driver for the cartridge, and I have all the descriptors. And then I have basically a Cisco-like program that boots up that is called FEU. It's called FUF, it's for Phoenix Executive Utility, I think is what it stands for. And it is basically an OS 9 program. And it knows how to go, and it just uses the devices to read OS 9 boot from either the SD card or the cartridge or drive wire, brings it into memory, and then boots the operating system that way.
So you're using level 1 to boot level 2.
Yeah, or level 1, or Phuzix, or Flex, whatever. Yeah, you just have it
like,
in the booter for them.
I was going to ask you, because I know there's a more advanced version of Flex 2 that did allow multitask stuff called Uniflex at one point. Is that available on the repository, or is it just the regular Flex that's on there?
Uniflex is available. I have not gone down that path yet, but somebody found a tape at some point, like a backup tape, that had some source code for Uniflex. But along the way, the community actually found this guy named Kees Schumacher, who actually used it for some projects back in the day, and actually is doing doing development. Um,
Yep.
Uniflex is a really, really strange combination of Flex and Unix concepts. I'm not fully prepared to say that much more about it, but it is out there. Um, and if you talk to Keys, he'd probably said, "Hey, I've got this new hardware. I want to port Uniflex to it." He'd probably be quite interested to help you.
I have a friend of mine, Paul Jacobs, who used to work for Micro, incidentally, that has ported I think he's working with Uniflex on the 6809. But I think it's that same gentleman you just mentioned, Mikey. Is he in Europe somewhere?
I think Keys is in Europe, but I'm not sure where.
He used to work for Flex or something. He actually has designed an SS50 bus, as I recall, with has
Yeah,
a
he
modern
designed it.
design on GitHub, and it runs Uniflex. I think Uniflex runs on that system only. It's a 6809 board, but it could be ported to another 6809 system. That'd be yet another operating system to port. Yes.
But I can actually run Uniflex in MAME, the SWTPC version.
Yeah.
I did have that running. I had it running the last time I went to Cocoa Fest, but I don't think think I wanted to show it to you, Boise, but you were busy off doing something else. So one
Yeah,
of
they're,
these
they're
days I'll get around to making a video about that. But I sort of wanted to do a more documentary style, and I just haven't had the time to start doing all the research required for that.
Yeah, the reason I brought it up is because I remember I've been going through ads and stuff in a chronological order here, doing research for a bunch of things, OS9 and Cocoa related. And on the non-Cocoa side of things, Flex was of course common on the 6800 and then the 6809, requiring less memory than OS9 level 1 even takes, though it's not quite as powerful. But once the multi-user and multitasking stuff of OS9 came out, Flex decided, well, we got to compete with that. So they created Uniflex, which actually does support some of that same stuff, and I think it even expands or allows you to run memory beyond 64K2, if I remember correctly.
It does,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So basically, it became a rival of OS9, though it didn't take off as much as OS9 Level 2 did. But they were distinct rivals, both on the same 6809 platform.
When did OS9 Level 2 actually come out? Because I know that OS9 itself was, I don't, like the 6809 really came out, I think it wasn't really commercially available in number until sometime in 1980. So, and I know that OS9 itself, Level 1, was around that same time as well.
Yeah, it came out in 1980. Level 2 is being advertised in 68 Microjournal probably around 82-ish. Because it was already out by the time OS9 on the Cocoa Level 1 finally came out. It was already out on the gimmicks.
So
right.
Uniflex was around the same. I did the research for this some time back. It was around the same time. I think they started TSC, Technical System Consultants, started advertising Uniflex in sometime in 81 and around 82. Sounds like OS9 Level 2 and Uniflex were kind of out at around the same time.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So there's
OS9
another
Level
option you
2,
can throw in there too, and Phusix and stuff. There's Phusix ports already on the Cocoa and other systems too. It's kind of a 8-bit Unix.
Yeah.
If the topic, Frederick, is about porting, I should put in a plug for Flex. That's going to be dead simple.
Okay. Okay. So I have a question about porting also, because obviously there's an element of graphical user interface on the interface on the OSs, right? All of them.
Some
Or
of them.
they're-
Nitrous 9 Level 2 and OS9 Level 2 from Tandy, like the Tandy version of that for the Cocoa specifically, does have some GUI interface stuff. Most of the other ones were terminal based, like the Gimmixes and SWTPCs, the Smoke Signal Chieftains, etc., were more terminal based type stuff, so they didn't have a GUI per se.
Okay. Okay. My only challenge I would have was, okay, what chip do I use for the graphics systems? Well, I managed to get my hands on the 68, 45, 47. Other than that, I have the Texas Instrument TMS 9918A, which is probably more interesting in certain aspects. I got the Yamaha V9958, which is the ones used on the MSX, but I don't know if driver wise, I'd have to change all the drivers for the graphics, or I'd simply use the 6847, for example, for the UI.
I would.
Boise, have you had any experience? Like you've helped port to some other machines, and like I know the Fujitsu had some sort of graphics chip, but I don't remember off the top of my head which one that was.
Yeah, no.
Atari, like you used their chips, right? So
yeah, but I stuck totally to console I/O. I did
okay.
not do anything with bitmap graphics. There's really not what I would consider a proven portability layer in OS 9 for that. I mean, we have the various system calls built into WinDent for level 2 and stuff like that, but that's only been done on one system, the Coco 3. And when you get into different resolutions and different screen sizes and different color depths and things like that, there really isn't a good way to address that in a hardware agnostic way in an OS 9 API. So it's almost like every system, when you get to it, you have an opportunity to roll your own. There's really no portable there. You can maybe agree or disagree with me, Curtis, but I would argue that G Shell and WinDent really aren't that portable because they're bound to the graphics capabilities of the Coco 3, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean the only place that ever got duplicated was the MM1, which is a 68K based machine, and they emulated it as close as you could, but I mean that's not a mainstream machine,
right?
Per se.
Right.
I guess it depends. Are you shooting? You want a GUI on there, Frederick, or do you just want a machine to run? You can put in like an 80 column chip. You don't have to use the VDG, which is like a primitive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't. It's not a necessity, but I was just referencing what I saw yesterday on Coco Tech, saying, "Well, that's interesting. I really like the GUI, how it's made." But
I mean, if you have the opportunity to use a chip that has some, high level functions built into it, like some bit splitting and stuff, so we can do the moving of windows around, because right now the CPU has to do all of that.
Yeah.
Like you could probably get it running pretty easily then, because you can just say, I want to create a window over here, this size, and scroll it up within this certain area. And while we have to do that all in software in the Coco, you probably can get the hardware to do it. In fact, it probably run more efficiently than the Coco 3 does.
Yeah, go ahead and put a Denise in there.
Yeah. I'm sure
the other thing you could do if you want to do it gradually is you could put in a text-only chip, or even the VDG if you want to get. I don't know how available VDGs are these days, but like a 6845 or something like that has 80 columns, you could have that as your base terminal to fire it up, and then you could have a graphics chip on there as well. Get the base hardware text working first, and then start adding in a graphics driver to run the graphics. That way, it's still a useful machine up before that. That's not.
I managed to get my hands on a few 6847s and 45, so I'll experiment with that.
But some of those other graphics chips you were mentioning, you would have to write a driver to handle it, and it would all go through the sequential character file manager so that you could abstract it a little bit. But as Boise said, when you start getting specific graphic modes, it gets a little bit hairy. Like you can't take an Amiga style thing and throw it onto a VGA card directly without conversion, right? So it's the same thing.
Exactly. Any speaking of conversion, well, not conversions, but the ports earlier on about software, I was thinking of having some applications, right, that are fully functional already, whether it be word processor, whether it be some sort of game. I realize that a lot of them of games are graphics based, but some of them are text based.
Like a Star Trek or something.
It's probably going to be easier to port over because obviously it's text based. What should I be concerned about when I port over to something that's a system that I've built from ground up? If my operating system is ported, well, I've managed to integrate it in my system. Is there a limit to what I can do with software that I grab? For example, I don't know. Let's take for example a Coco game that I'm grabbing from the Coco archives. And
Yeah,
I want
it'll
to have
depend on the game. Most of them have the graphics based. You've got the same problem with doing a GUI, right? It's how do you program that? Now, if you have a text-based game, we have some games like Rogue, or some of the Star Trek variants from back in the 70s and 80s, and other games along that line that are run on 80 by 25 screen, because the hardware is abstracted out through device drivers and device descriptors. Basically, if you support like cursor XY and home cursor and clear to the end of line and all this stuff you'd see like in a VT100 terminal, for example, those will run. And there's text editors you can run that way. There's all kinds of stuff. It's kind of like running text-based stuff on a Unix system, where it doesn't matter which Unix system you have, it's going to work. Like Emacs and VI and stuff all works the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can definitely do if you just made the driver to handle the hardware text version of it and be able to handle the cursor addressing stuff, inverse video, etc. That you could port over pretty well. Actually, you wouldn't have to port really. You would just have to run it as long as it has the same size.
I did that on the F256 recently. I had Dynacalc running without porting it. It just ran because it's binary compatible. And my terminal driver handled all the escape codes to do the cursor control. And Rogue ran out of the box. There was one thing about Rogue, Curtis, that's why I had asked you for the source code. It turned out it wasn't a problem, but Rogue does assume certain things about having the PIA there to do some sound.
Sound, yeah.
Right, that I commented out, and reassembled, but I could have run the binary and did run the binary probably just as easy. So anything text-based, as long as the console driver handles the cursor stuff, it should just run.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to change anything for those.
Yeah. PIA is
in case you don't know, the Dynacalc is a spreadsheet, so he was running basically the equivalent of VisiCalc.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the PIA is it's a peripheral interface adapter that the Coco has that ties into some. You can use it to manipulate, do some simple sound. I think 1-bit sound, or is it 6-bit sound?
6-bit and 1-bit.
6-bit sound.
Yeah. And anyway, the folks who wrote Rogue, the game, instead of using the kernel to abstract out any kind of sound or use the device driver, they actually embedded the pokes and peaks into the hardware, into the game itself, into the game binary, which is not a good thing to do, because if you want to take that binary and run it on another OS9 system that doesn't have that particular hardware, it's going to bang at something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So other than that minor offense, there was nothing else about the game that I saw that was hardware specific.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why Epix did that with the Rogue port on the Coco, because literally there's a Control-G bell that all the terminals have, including OS9. Yep. They could have just done that. But no, they hard-coded a little thing to talk to the PIA in 6 bits and do envelope and wave, and just to do a beep. That's all it does.
Right. But that's the exception. If well-written, well-behaved OS9 programs are going to not make assumptions about hardware inside the code itself. And again, you can get a spreadsheet like Dynacalc and a game like Rogue, and if those run, then pretty much any text-based game will run. It's when you get to the graphics games that you're going to have a problem.
Okay.
And for Flex, we have to remember that this is coming from a much simpler time, and basically you only have terminal input and output. That's all you have, and the operating system itself doesn't really know anything about what kind of terminal you have. You just have a way to read from the keyboard and write to the screen.
Yeah, basic console I/O.
So when you're running applications like Stylograph and Dynamite and those kind of programs on Flex, they have a way to change the terminal driver in the actual program itself, because that stuff is not in the operating system. OS 9, you have standardized terminal control codes that you can, in your driver, you can handle those and translate them from the OS 9 ones to something else. But in Flex, there's no such thing. So you'll be able to either rebuild the application, or one of the big Flex guys likes the Televideo 920 terminal. So you'll find a lot of applications that know how to drive that terminal. And then there are a bunch of other people. One of the guys on YouTube has a Wise terminal, which is going to do VT100, and he's always recompiling things so that it knows how to do VT100. And I'm I'm doing some of that kind of porting work for the Cocoa version of Flex, which starts out with a 51 column screen, and many of the applications again assume an 80 column screen. So things like that. But so Flex is a little bit, because it's from an earlier time, it's a little bit different, and you don't have the really have the operating system. You don't have the operating system getting in your way of whatever you write to the terminal. So
The support for all of the operating system, do they all support 6309?
Flex, no.
Flex, no?
No, I'm bugging Mikey to do. No, I'm just kidding.
Will there be a support for 6309 eventually? Will there be an advantage?
Well, you could definitely make Flex run faster, but how active is the Flex, the actual operating system community, as opposed to apps, etc., Mikey? Because you're much more in touch with them than I am.
I think as the Nitrous 9 community is doing a lot more than the Flex community is. Really, I'm on the main Flex mailing list. It's called the Fufu list, Flex and Uniflex. And there's really the one guy, Michael Evanson, who's constantly sending emails about all of the cool stuff he's doing. And what was he working on most recently? He has an emulator for the Southwestern Technical Products computers, and he added I don't know why he picked NE2000. He added an NE2000 network card emulation to the thing. Rest of the people don't really hear from them very much and don't really know if or what they do. Like I said, I have heard from Keys Schumacher doing some Uniflex work in the last year, but I think you and Boise and Bill Noble are a lot more active doing things than I think is going on in the Flex world.
Yeah, I will say the Fusic world is actually active. Actually, Alan Cox is the guy who does the ports on the Cocoa as well as some other machines. He's very active in that. So if you want even more Unix-like than OS 9, which is loosely based on Unix, then that's another option.
But get ready to read for Fusics. Get ready to read a lot of source code to figure out how to do things. So,
oh yeah.
Flex is so simple. I can just send you the link to the documents. I think you can sit down and read them, and then you'll be like, "Oh, cool! I see how to port this because they have a document how to do it." Nitrous 9 has sufficient technical documentation to understand the basics of the system, and then when you start looking at the source code, you will be able to go, "Oh yeah, I SCF. I read about that. I understand what that in SCF and IOMAN. I understand what those things do." Then you can sort of go into it. But I would say that understanding physics doesn't really have documentation. It would be kind of like back in the day, there was a guy. I forget the professor's name. There's a guy who wrote the book about the Unix system 5 or 6 manual, and then they used that. It would be like going to university operating systems class and learning the thing inside and out. At least that's my opinion. I find the style of that code is advanced, and you have to read a lot of things to figure out what's going on.
Wow.
Yeah, Boise, have you had much experience with Fusics? Because I haven't actually. I've just seen it run a couple times, but I haven't experienced with it at all.
I have no experience with it. Brett Gordon is the man when it comes to physics.
I mean, I fairly recently ported my SDC Commander application to it. From the application perspective, it was almost just like any other Unix. I didn't, but when you're getting into the operating system stuff, every time I try to understand, I kind of understand how the DriveWire module works, but if you start getting into the terminal stuff and the disk drivers, there's all these, it's all, it's a lot. It's a big hill to climb over.
Oh, you mentioned something, and well, actually, many of you mentioned it before, and especially Sloopy tried to explain to me before, and the concept did not stick in my mind. What is drive wire exactly?
Boise, since you created it, I think you're best qualified, and Mikey as well, because he's actually done a recent port using Python.
Yeah, DriveWire is a protocol that defines communication between, I would say, Cocoa, which is where it started, and a server, a host, like a PC or a Mac. And it allows that server to serve up disk sectors to the Cocoa so that the Cocoa can see the host as an extension of a file system, of a disk drive. And it was created by me in 2003 because I was at the time I was doing a lot of traveling and I didn't want to take a floppy drive in my suitcase. So I had my Cocoa and I'd take it with me. I had my Mac, my Power Mac at the time. I wrote this host software on the Mac. I wrote some intelligence on the Cocoa, put it into ROM, connected it with a serial cable, and that way I could boot OS 9 off of a serial cable. And the OS 9 operating system was simply just a file on the Mac. It was just an image of a floppy disk that had, sector 0 all the way to sector n-1. And so over the years, different servers or hosts have been written through different languages. Mikey did PyDriveWire, which is a Python-based one. So that's what DriveWire is. It's a poor man's floppy drive. It's what it was intended to be, but it's also kind of expanded to do some other things like networking, and it's become sort of like a multi-utility NI for the Cocoa.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's earlier. I think you used the term virtual disk, and I think I corrected you to with SD cards, and I said it's more like partitions.
Partition, yeah.
DriveWire, I would definitely call it a virtual disk, and the virtual disk is basically just an array of sectors, sector 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and basically DriveWire provides a way for the Cocoa to request a sector from the virtual disk on the server. And there's a basic ROM to have DriveWire in Nitrous 9, of course, and where Boise originally did it. Boise, you probably originally did it for OS 9 rather than Nitrous 9, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of
Probably.
at the time where it was being ported, but yeah.
And there's also DriveWire in PhysX. Outside of the Cocoa and the Nitrous 9 systems that you've ported it to, like you have the Atari and the Phoenix that you were working on more recently. Do you know of any other systems that use DriveWire?
No, the Atari folks have their own DriveWire-like
FujiNet.
program. Well, it's called it's not FujiNet. It's something else. FujiNet is
It's called SIO2PC.
yeah,
PC.
but isn't it
Yeah,
called
it's been around
Aspect?
since
Isn't the software called Aspect or something like that?
That's one of the there's Aspect, there's Respect.
Yeah.
It's been around since the mid to late 80s or mid to late 90s.
Yeah, the concept of using a modern PC is not that new as an adjunct to a less powerful computer as a storage system. But DriveWire is more what I would call Cocoa oriented, or at least started there. It's been ported to other systems, but aside from the Atari 8-bit Liberato 9 board that has a 6809 that I put in it, and that's OS 9 anyway, I can't think of any non-6809 systems that are actively using DriveWire because those other systems have their own type of DriveWire-ish functionality.
If I may go out on a tangent here for 1 second. Boise, is that a Atari 130XE top case on top of an Atari 800XL behind you?
Yeah. It's just stacked there. There's no kind of Frankenstein thing.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah. So just for Frederick's elucidation, so back in 2013, I I designed a board that would interface the 6809 into an Atari 8-bit computer. Take the 6502 out, put the 6809 daughter board in, and my interest in that was I always loved the fact that the Ataris had the additional hardware for doing graphics and sound, and I wanted to utilize that with the 6809 in place of a 6502. And I ported OS 9 level 1 to that Frankenstein computer. So, and DriveWire too. So DriveWire was a way of booting. But to get to your original question, I think for your board, if you had a serial port, are you planning on doing any kind of serial or parallel port?
Yep.
DriveWire could be an additional way to boot an operating system into your system without having a physical SD card or some other type of storage.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and what you may also want to consider is, although the FT232RL IC is a very common chip for converting
Yes.
USB to serial,
Mm-hmm.
there is another FTDI chip that is actual parallel to USB serial.
Mm-hmm.
And you may want to consider using that instead, because that'll give you a parallel interface to the USB instead of the serial that you'd have to bit bang or something, which would be significantly faster for data transfer.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of, we were mentioning about Frankensteining and sound and stuff like that, and you wanted to use a sound system on the Atari, you said. I never understood why there was no real sound system on the Coco, but I just purchased a Coco 3, which is going to arrive soon, I hope. But I did also purchase a Symphonic 12, if I
Symphony
recall
12,
the names.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Will any of the OSs support this sound card on a Coco 3, for example, with any of the OSs?
The Symphony 12 I support in Nitrous 9, but it's through a program called Play, and it outputs the stereo 8-bit samples. I did patch the main sound driver, which normally goes to the 6-bit DAC built into the PIA in the Coco 3 itself, to do 8-bit output and stuff too, but it's not really a driver per se. It's just you basically can blast tones at it,
Okay.
or raw digital samples.
We
An
never
actual
did.
full-blown sound chip. There is a driver for the what is in the speech sound pack. Is that an AY chip?
It's an AY chip. I
8910?
don't remember which one.
The 8910?
Yeah, 8910, 8913, something like that. But it's there is a driver in existence for that that actually lets you
For
do
speech.
multi-voice music and stuff through it as well. So
We never did write a sound driver for any of those, right?
no, I never did. The level 3 or level 2 version 3 upgrade was supposed to do it, but I don't think they ever completed that either, did they?
No.
I think they just put the hooks in for it, and that's as
No,
far as
and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that there's not an API, a clean API in OS 9 for graphics, and neither is there for sound. Well, for sound, there is some. There's the SS tone stat call that you can call, but it hasn't been exercised. So there is some work that needs to be done to exercise that API for different sound hardware.
and add polyphonic support where you can do more than one voice at once.
Right.
Yeah, a bit like my system that I've created with the 6502 has 4 AY3 chips. I overkill much?
Yeah, the Symphony 12 is like that too. Actually, it has 4 of them, so you can do that. That was a commercial product in the Coco back in the day, but it was more meant for music writers. It wasn't meant for games or anything.
Yeah, true. I don't know if we're reaching the 2-hour mark. I think we've covered pretty much a lot, I guess. I don't know if you have any last words for poor little old me.
I guess I'll volunteer to help you with any testing and stuff you want to do with the software. Maybe do some patches for you, or I don't know what Boise's time's like these days. I'm pretty sure he's probably pretty busy with a lot of projects here, but he's definitely had more experience than anybody else in the panel here as far as porting OS 9 to other systems. I've only done Coco related stuff, though.
I think a level 1 port to your board would be very, very easy. At the
Okay.
minimum, you can get the kernel running and some basic I/O. You don't even have to have a console driver just to prove out that the kernel runs. But once you get that written, it's not too bad. Depends again what type of hardware you have for console I/O, and then any kind of storage stuff you do, a driver could easily be written for those.
Okay.
I think FlexPort would be so simple. Um, and if you basically started with a monitor that can send and receive S19, you could probably very easily bootstrap it. And I could even point you to a couple of videos to get some ideas of how you would go about doing that. But I know that Boise and Curtis are going to say to do Nitrous 9. Well, Nitrous 9 is really a more powerful operating system, but with that power, a little bit more complicated to do the porting, but not like Physix would be.
All right.
And
The thing we have to find out from you is that what you decide your base hardware on your new computer is going to be. Like, are you going to have a specialized graphics chip, specialized sound chip, or are you going to go with the more, traditional, like a 80 column hardware text chip or something like that to start, or maybe you're going to have both in there so that you can, create a simpler version of it first and expand it afterwards, etc.
I have a slew of chips, and I'll have to decide which one I'll use for sure. There's a ton of questioning, internal questions I have to answer myself, but I have a pretty good idea of where I want to go with this. And what I'll do though is once my design is going to be pretty much not complete, but have the big picture of it, I can always send it to you, and well, at least the hard lines, and let me know what you think, and I'll definitely also choose my first port. I'll decide after reviewing this video over and over again.
I have so
And
many notes of things. Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay.
I already have so many notes of things that I want to send to you. Sorry for blurting out. I was going to ask how can we get in touch with you. So I apologize for interjecting with that.
No problem. Look, I'll send my info on the chat that we opened in the Discord.
Okay.
That's cool.
Discord sounds good.
All right, cool. Well, now it's been 2 hours, so I want to really thank you all for being here and taking the time, and we will see each other probably some other time, hopefully. And if you have any questions or you want to reach me, Discord is the best way, I guess. We have our personal DM that's already up and running. And,
Depending on how far you get, if you have an opportunity to make it to Cocoa Fest, since most of us will be there, you can actually hit us all at the same time and actually see some live demos of some of this stuff running on the Cocoa anyway. That might be not a bad idea. It's in May, first weekend in May.
Where is it?
In Chicago. Technically, it's in, Carroll Stream?
Yeah.
Okay.
In Chicago area.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about it more, Frederick.
All right, perfect. And I'll continue on watching the Cocoa Nation shows also. Hopefully, I'll learn some more there also.
Yeah, and thanks for picking a 6809 639. I think you'll really like the chip once you get into it.
I've posted a poll on the internet, on my channel, on Twitter, and Facebook, and I kept saying, "Well, what do you want to do? What do you want me to do as a next project?" And the Z80, the 6502, and other CPUs. And I did not list the 6809 because I frankly forgot about it. And in the comments, I kept having 6809, 6809. What about that one? There's also the 6309. Oh yeah, so I repolled, and before it was the Z80 that was the winner, and now the 6809 became the winner. As I repolled.
Yay!
I cannot confirm nor deny any allegations that I may have had a hand in a large number of 6809 people.
We're a pretty enthusiastic bunch.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you again, and have a good night.
All right, no
Right.
problem.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.